It was a quiet evening in a small, unassuming neighborhood, the kind of place where the days blend together, where people keep to themselves, and where the biggest excitement might be the sound of kids playing in the street. For Angela Carter, a single mother working long hours to provide for her family, it was supposed to be just another night. She had just returned home, her hands full with groceries, her mind preoccupied with the endless list of things she needed to do. Bills to pay, meals to prepare, a life to hold together. But as she stepped inside her modest home, something felt off. A strange unease settled over her, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. She brushed it off at first, just exhaustion, she thought. But then came the sound, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel, the flash of red and blue lights cutting through the curtains. And then, the knock. It wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from someone asking for directions or delivering a package. It was loud, forceful, demanding. Angela froze for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hadn't done anything wrong. So why were they here? When she opened the door, she was met with the cold, unflinching stares of several officers. Their presence was overwhelming, their tone sharp and accusatory. They didn't ask, they demanded. Demanded to know who she was, what she was doing, and why she was there. As if she didn't belong in her own home. As if her very existence was a problem that needed solving. Angela tried to explain. She told them she was a nurse, that she had just come home from a long shift, that she didn't understand what this was about. But they didn't care. They weren't listening. They searched her car without asking. They questioned her as if she were a criminal. And when she asked why, they only grew more aggressive. She was alone, vulnerable, outnumbered, and no one came to help. Neighbors peeked through their windows but quickly turned away, unwilling to get involved. Angela felt the weight of it all pressing down on her, the fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. She thought about her son, Marcus, thousands of miles away. She thought about how proud he would be of her for staying strong, for holding her ground. But in that moment, she didn't feel strong. She felt small. What the officers didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Marcus Carter was no ordinary man. He wasn't just her son. He was a leader, a protector. A man who had spent years in the most dangerous corners of the world, facing threats that most people couldn't even comprehend. A man whose name was spoken with respect and fear in equal measure. Marcus wasn't just a soldier. He was one of the most highly trained Special Forces commanders in the world, a man who had led missions that would never make the news, who had faced enemies that most people would never even know existed. And when he found out what was happening to his mother, he didn't hesitate. Angela didn't know it yet, but the voicemail she left for Marcus, her voice trembling as she tried to explain what was happening, would set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Marcus was thousands of miles away, but distance meant nothing to him. He had faced impossible odds before, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in his way now. As the officers continued their harassment, as they pushed Angela further and further, Marcus was already on his way. He wasn't coming to talk. He wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to protect his mother, to stand up for what was right, and to make sure that those who had crossed the line would never forget the consequences of their actions. This is the story of a mother who refused to break, a son who refused to back down, and a confrontation that would leave everyone involved questioning how far they were willing to go for justice. It's a story of courage, of resilience, and of a reckoning that no one saw coming. Angela Carter was the kind of woman who carried the weight of the world on her shoulders but never let it show. A single mother, she had spent years working tirelessly as a nurse, dedicating her life to helping others while raising her son, Marcus, on her own. Her days were long, filled with the endless demands of her job, patients to care for, emergencies to handle, and lives to save. But no matter how exhausted she was, Angela always made time for Marcus. He was her pride, her joy, and her reason for pushing forward, even when life felt impossibly hard. Marcus Carter wasn't just any son. From a young age, he had shown a strength and determination that set him apart. Angela had always known he was destined for something extraordinary, and she wasn't wrong. Marcus grew up to become one of the most decorated Special Forces commanders in the world. He had led missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, earning the respect of his peers and the fear of his enemies. But to Angela, he was still her boy. The same boy who used to sit at the kitchen table doing his homework while she cooked dinner. The same boy who promised her he'd always protect her, no matter what. Angela lived in a small suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew each other but kept their distance. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. Recently, though, the neighborhood had changed. There had been whispers, stories of local police officers abusing their power, targeting residents without cause, and using intimidation to keep people silent. Angela had heard the stories, but she never thought it would happen to her. She was a nurse, a mother, a law-abiding citizen. Why would they come after her? But they did. It started with small things, being pulled over for no reason, officers lingering near her home, watching her as she came and went. At first, Angela tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just a coincidence. But it wasn't. The harassment escalated. They began questioning her, accusing her of things she didn't do. They searched her car without a warrant, showed up at her house late at night, and made it clear that they weren't going to stop. Angela didn't know why they had targeted her, but she knew one thing: she was alone. Her neighbors, who had once waved to her from their porches, now avoided her gaze. They didn't want to get involved. And Marcus, her rock, her protector, was thousands of miles away, deployed on a mission he couldn't talk about. Angela felt trapped, helpless, and afraid. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Angela wasn't just fighting for her dignity. She was fighting for her safety, her freedom, and her ability to protect the life she had built for herself and her son. She tried to stay strong, to remind herself that Marcus would want her to hold her head high. But as the officer's harassment grew more aggressive, Angela began to wonder how much more she could take. What she didn't know was that Marcus was about to find out what was happening, and when he did, he would stop at nothing to make it right. The harassment didn't stop. In fact, it only got worse. Angela began to notice the officers more frequently, parked near her home, following her as she drove to work, and even showing up at the hospital where she worked. They didn't say much, but their presence was enough to send a clear message. They were watching her. One evening, as Angela returned home from another grueling shift, she found two officers waiting for her in her driveway. They claimed they had received a report about suspicious activity at her house. Angela was confused. There was no suspicious activity. She lived alone, worked long hours, and barely had time for anything else. But the officers didn't care. They insisted on searching her home. Angela, knowing she had nothing to hide, reluctantly let them in. As they walked through her home, opening drawers and cabinets, Angela felt a deep sense of violation. This was her sanctuary, the one place where she felt safe. And now, even that had been taken from her. When the officers finally left, they didn't apologize or explain. They simply told her to stay out of trouble and drove away, leaving Angela standing in her doorway, shaken and humiliated. Angela tried to stay strong, but the stress was beginning to take its toll. She started losing sleep, constantly looking over her shoulder and jumping at every sound. She didn't know who to turn to. Her neighbors avoided her, her coworkers didn't want to get involved, and Marcus, her son, her protector, was still thousands of miles away. But Angela couldn't take it anymore. One night, after another run-in with the officers, she sat down at her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she picked up her phone. She hesitated for a moment, staring at Marcus's name on the screen. She didn't want to worry him. She knew how dangerous his job was, and the last thing she wanted was to distract him. But she also knew she couldn't handle this alone. With a deep breath, Angela pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. Her voice cracked as she began to speak. "Marcus, it's me. I don't know what to do anymore. They won't leave me alone. I'm scared, Marcus. I need you." She hung up, tears streaming down her face, and sat in silence, hoping, praying, that her son would hear her message. Thousands of miles away, Marcus was in the middle of a mission. He was focused, his mind sharp, as he led his team through a dangerous operation. But when he returned to base and checked his phone, everything changed. He listened to Angela's voicemail, his jaw tightening with every word. He could hear the fear in her voice, the desperation. And in that moment, Marcus made a decision. He went straight to his commanding officer and requested emergency leave. He didn't explain much, just that his mother was in trouble and he needed to get home. His reputation preceded him, and his request was granted without question. Within hours, Marcus was on a plane, heading back to the one person who had always been there for him. Back in Angela's neighborhood, the officers were growing bolder. They began showing up at her house more frequently, banging on her door late at night, and accusing her of crimes she didn't commit. Angela tried to stand her ground, but she was running out of strength. She didn't know that Marcus was already on his way, and when he arrived, everything would change. Heading back to the United States, as he sat in his seat, staring out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, his mind raced. He thought about his mother, about the fear in her voice, about the officers who had dared to harass her. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know that Angela Carter's son was a man who had faced down enemies far more dangerous than them, and they were about to find out. But as Marcus made his way home, the situation for Angela was growing worse. The officers, emboldened by her lack of support from the community, decided to escalate their harassment. One evening, as Angela was leaving the hospital after a long shift, they were waiting for her in the parking lot. They accused her of theft, an absurd claim with no evidence, and when she protested, they arrested her on the spot. Angela was handcuffed in front of her co-workers, her face a mix of shock and despair. She tried to explain, to plead her case, but the officers didn't care. They shoved her into the back of a police car and drove off, leaving her co-workers stunned and helpless. At the station, Angela was treated like a criminal. They fingerprinted her, took her mugshot, and locked her in a holding cell. She sat on the cold, hard bench, her mind racing. How had it come to this? She had done nothing wrong. She was a nurse, a mother, a woman who had spent her life helping others, and now she was sitting in a jail cell, accused of a crime she didn't commit. Meanwhile, Marcus's plane touched down. He stepped off the aircraft, his military uniform crisp, his medals gleaming in the sunlight. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. He didn't waste any time. He got into a car and began the drive to his mother's town, his mind focused on one thing: getting to Angela and putting an end to this nightmare. As Marcus made his way closer, the tension in the town was reaching a breaking point. The officers, unaware of who Marcus was or that he was on his way, continued their campaign of intimidation. They visited Angela's home, searching it without a warrant, and left it in disarray. They told her neighbors that she was under investigation, further isolating her from the community. But Angela, even in her darkest moments, held on to one thing: hope. She knew her son. She knew that if Marcus had heard her message, he would come for her. And when he did, she knew he wouldn't stop until justice was served. The stage was set. On one side, a group of officers who had grown too comfortable abusing their power, confident that no one would stand up to them. On the other, a man who had spent his life fighting for what was right, who had faced down enemies far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. And in the middle, a mother who had endured more than anyone should ever have to. Marcus was almost there, and when he arrived, The balance of power would shift in a way no one could have anticipated. As Marcus's plane touched down, his mind was already racing. He had replayed Angela's voicemail countless times during the flight, analyzing every word, every tremor in her voice. He knew she was in trouble, but he didn't know the full extent of what had happened. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The moment he stepped off the plane, Marcus called one of Angela's neighbors, Mrs. Jenkins, a kind woman who had always looked out for his mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice trembling. "Marcus, thank God you're here," she said. "They took her. The police came to the hospital and arrested her. They said she stole something, but we all know that's a lie." Marcus's grip on his phone tightened. "Where did they take her?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "To the station," Mrs. Jenkins replied. "They've been harassing her for weeks, Marcus. It's not right. You have to do something." "I will," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins." He ended the call and got into his car, his military training kicking in. He had a location, he had a mission, and he wasn't going to fail. As Marcus drove through the quiet streets of the town, he noticed the way people avoided his gaze, the way curtains twitched as he passed. The tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't just about his mother. This was about a community that had been silenced by fear. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He had faced down enemies far more dangerous than these officers, and he wasn't about to back down now. Marcus pulled into the parking lot of the police station, his car coming to a sharp stop. He stepped out, his military uniform crisp, his medals gleaming in the fading sunlight. His presence alone was enough to turn heads, but Marcus wasn't here to make an impression. He was here to get his mother back. Inside the station, the officers were going about their day, laughing and chatting as if nothing was wrong. They had no idea who was about to walk through their doors. Marcus pushed the door open, the sound echoing through the room, and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Conversations stopped. All eyes turned to him. Marcus scanned the room, his gaze sharp and unyielding. He spotted the officer at the front desk and walked straight toward him. The officer, a man who had grown too comfortable in his position of power, looked up with a smirk. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm here for Angela Carter," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She's my mother, and I want her released. Now. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Your mother's been arrested," he said. "She's under investigation. If you've got a problem with that, you can take it up with the chief." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his expression remained calm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his military ID, placing it on the desk in front of the officer. "I'm Major Marcus Carter," he said, his voice steady. "Special Forces. I've led missions in places you can't even pronounce. I've faced enemies far more dangerous than you, and I'm not leaving this station without my mother." The officer's smirk faltered. He picked up the ID, his eyes widening as he read the name and credentials. He looked back at Marcus, suddenly unsure of himself. I'll get the chief," he stammered, before hurrying off. As the officer disappeared into the back, the room remained silent. The other officers exchanged nervous glances, their confidence beginning to waver. Marcus stood tall, his expression unreadable, but his presence spoke volumes. He wasn't here to play games. A few moments later, the chief of police emerged, his face a mix of annoyance and curiosity. He walked up to Marcus, sizing him up. "I'm Chief Daniels," he said. "What seems to be the problem?" Marcus didn't waste any time. "The problem," he said, "is that your officers have been harassing my mother. They've searched her home without a warrant, arrested her on false charges, and treated her like a criminal when she's done nothing wrong. I want her released. Now. The chief crossed his arms, clearly trying to assert his authority. "Your mother is under investigation," he said, We're just doing our job." Marcus took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Your job," he said, "is to uphold the law, not to abuse it. I've seen men like you before, men who think their badge gives them the right to do whatever they want. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not afraid of you. And if you don't release my mother, I'll make one phone call, and this entire station will be under federal investigation by the end of the day." The chief hesitated, his confidence beginning to crack. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You think I'm bluffing?" he asked. "I've got the number of a high-ranking official in the Department of Justice. One call, and your career is over." The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The chief glanced around, realizing that his officers were watching, their expressions a mix of fear and uncertainty. He knew he was cornered. "Fine," the chief said, his voice tight. "Release her." The officer at the front desk hurried to comply, disappearing into the back to retrieve Angela. A few moments later, she emerged, her face pale but her eyes filled with relief. When she saw Marcus, she broke into a run, throwing her arms around him. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You came." Marcus held her tightly, his expression softening for the first time. "I told you I'd always protect you," he said. As Angela clung to her son, the officers in the room looked on, their confidence shattered. They had underestimated Angela Carter. They had underestimated her son. And now, they were going to face the consequences. Marcus turned back to the chief, his expression hardening once more. "This isn't over," he said. "I'm filing a formal complaint and I'll make sure every one of you is held accountable for what you've done." The chief didn't respond. He simply nodded, his face pale. In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story of Angela Carter and her son, the Special Forces commander who had stood up to a corrupt police department. The officers involved were placed under investigation, their actions scrutinized by higher authorities. Angela's story became a rallying cry for the community. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out began to share their own experiences of harassment and intimidation. They organized meetings, demanding accountability and change. And at the forefront of it all was Angela, her voice stronger than ever. Marcus stayed by her side every step of the way, ensuring she felt safe and supported. Together, they became a symbol of resilience and justice, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to fight back and win. For the first time in a long time, Angela felt safe. But more than that, she felt proud. Proud of her son, who had kept his promise to protect her. Proud of herself, for standing strong in the face of adversity. And proud of the fact that justice in the end had prevailed. As Angela clung to Marcus, the weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift from her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. But Marcus wasn't done. He gently pulled away from his mother, his expression softening as he looked into her eyes. "Mom, I need you to wait outside," he said, his voice calm but firm. Angela hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Marcus, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again," he replied. "Trust me." Angela nodded, her faith in her son unwavering. She stepped outside, where a small crowd had begun to gather. Word had spread quickly that something was happening at the station, and neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out were now watching, their curiosity and hope growing with every passing moment. Inside, Marcus turned back to the chief, his expression hardening once more. The room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The officers who had once laughed and joked now stood frozen, their confidence shattered. "Let's talk about what's going to happen next," Marcus said, his voice low and steady. "You're going to cooperate fully with the investigation that's coming your way. You're going to hand over every piece of evidence related to my mother's case, and you're going to make sure that every officer involved in this harassment is held accountable. Do I make myself clear?" The chief opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus cut him off. Don't even think about it, Marcus said, his tone sharp. I've already contacted someone at the Department of Justice. They're expecting my call. If I don't walk out of here with a full report of what's been done to my mother, this station will be swarming with federal agents by morning. The chief's face turned pale. He glanced around the room, looking for support, but none of his officers met his gaze. They knew Marcus wasn't bluffing. Fine, the chief said through gritted teeth. We'll cooperate. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. And one more thing, he added, stepping closer. If I hear about you or any of your officers harassing another member of this community, I'll be back, and next time I won't be so polite. The chief swallowed hard, nodding silently. Marcus turned and walked out of the station, his steps measured and deliberate. As he stepped outside, the crowd that had gathered erupted into murmurs. Angela was standing at the front, her hands clasped tightly together. When she saw Marcus, her face lit up with relief. It's over, Marcus said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. They're going to be held accountable. The crowd fell silent for a moment, and then someone began to clap. Slowly, others joined in, the sound growing louder and more powerful. It wasn't just applause. It was a release of tension, a collective expression of hope and gratitude. Angela stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Marcus, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know how to thank you. Marcus smiled, his eyes softening. You don't have to thank me, Mom, he said. You've always been there for me. It's my turn to be there for you. In the days that followed, the story of Angela Carter and her son spread far beyond the small town. News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting it across the country. Headlines like, Special Forces Commander Stands Up to Corrupt Police Department, and Mother and Son Inspire Community to Fight Back dominated the airwaves. The officers involved in Angela's harassment were placed under investigation, their actions scrutinized by higher authorities. Some were suspended, others resigned, and the chief himself faced mounting pressure to step down. The community, once silent and fearful, began to find its voice. Angela became a symbol of resilience and courage. She spoke at community meetings, sharing her story and encouraging others to come forward. Her voice, once trembling with fear, now carried strength and conviction. She emphasized the importance of standing up against injustice, of refusing to let fear silence the truth. Marcus stayed by her side every step of the way. He attended meetings, helped organize rallies, and used his connections to bring in legal and advocacy groups to support the community. Together, they became a force for change, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, it's possible to fight back and win. One evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, Angela and Marcus sat on the porch of her home. The air was filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting, a stark contrast to the tension that had once permeated their lives. Angela turned to Marcus, her heart swelling with pride. I never thought I could be this strong, she admitted, her voice soft. Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. You've always been strong, Mom, he said. You just needed to see it for yourself. As they sat together, Angela felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had fought for her dignity, for her son, and for her community. And now, she was ready to take the next step. She wanted to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had faced. In the weeks that followed, Angela became an advocate for change, speaking at events and working with local organizations to push for police reform. Her story resonated with many, inspiring others to come forward and demand better from their local law enforcement. Marcus, too, found a new purpose. He used his military experience to train community members in de-escalation techniques and self-defense, empowering them to protect themselves and each other. Together, he and Angela transformed their pain into progress, their struggle into strength. And as the community rallied around them, one thing became clear. This was only the beginning. Angela and Marcus had sparked a movement, one that would continue to grow and inspire others for years to come. The story of Angela and Marcus Carter didn't end with the investigation into the police department. It was only the beginning of a larger movement, one that would ripple far beyond their small town. Angela, once a quiet nurse who had spent her life helping others, had become a powerful advocate for justice. She worked tirelessly to ensure that no one else would have to endure the harassment and intimidation she had faced. She partnered with local and national organizations, speaking at events and sharing her story with anyone who would listen. Her voice, once silenced by fear, now carried the strength of an entire community. Marcus, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. His military career had taught him how to fight battles on foreign soil, but now he was fighting a different kind of war, one for dignity, equality, and accountability. He used his skills to empower others, training community members in self-defense and de-escalation techniques, and working with local leaders to implement reforms. Together, Angela and Marcus became a symbol of resilience and hope. Their story inspired others to stand up against injustice, to speak out even when it was difficult, and to believe that change was possible. Months later, the town was no longer the same. The police department had undergone a complete overhaul, with new leadership and stricter oversight. Community meetings were held regularly, giving residents a platform to voice their concerns and hold their leaders accountable. The fear that had once gripped the town was replaced by a sense of unity and determination. One evening, as Angela and Marcus sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood come alive with laughter and conversation, Angela turned to her son. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Marcus smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We've done a lot, Mom," he said, "but there's always more to do. The fight for justice doesn't end. It just changes." Angela nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. She knew he was right. The work they had done was important, but it was only the beginning. There were still battles to be fought, voices to be heard, and lives to be changed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in a warm golden glow, Angela felt a sense of peace. She had faced her fears, stood up for what was right, and found strength she never knew she had. And with Marcus by her side, she knew they could face whatever came next. Their story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about finding hope in the darkest of times, about the power of love and resilience, and about the belief that even the smallest voices can spark the biggest changes. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Angela and Marcus sat together, ready to face the future, knowing that they had already made a difference, and that their fight for justice would continue. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Marcus's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Together we can amplify voices, inspire change, and stand up for what's right.